It's the Full Court Press with Eric Frandsen and Jason Walker.
Welcome back to the to the show that we're doing right now.
Following the local teams, breaking down the biggest games with in-depth analysis and team interview. Join the show by calling into 435-752-1069 or text 435-339-0321. It's the Full Court Press.
Rose, answer. Yes! Caught! Touchdown! They did it!
A special podcast edition here of the Full Court Press. Eric Frandsen, Jason Walker. Utah Jazz have preempted our airwaves. But
technically recording this at the same time we normally do our show.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Schedule's not been disrupted that much. It's just our live listening audience won't be able to hear us as we're going over the airwaves on 106.9 The Fan, 1390 AM. But as always, we're on our podcast feed, which you can find at 1069thefan.com or wherever you get your podcast. Just search for the Full Court Press, and you can find us. So we wanted to make sure we had a podcast edition of the show, partly because if we have no show, then it's like, well, we got to do something, help out the listeners. But also,
especially since there was so much that happened.
A lot happening over the weekend, particularly with the men's basketball team. That's going to be a big focus of our show, along with some new transfers. Utah State football adding transfers as they are able to, the portal is closed, so new entries cannot go into the portal. I think the Aggies end up with like 26 or 27 portal entries. If I remember off the top of my head, I updated my transfer tracker earlier today. And then they're now up to, I think, 16 transfer additions. So coming close to accounting for a lot of the graduations and transfer outs that they have. They are adding a lot of quality players, I think. A lot of FCS players that were, high-level producers at that level. Power conference transfers who have actually made an impact at some of their power conference teams. And now they're coming to Utah State. So a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism, and a lot of size being added by the Aggies. But we'll get into that later because we've got some bigger fish to fry in the form of Utah State basketball and their loss to Grand Canyon on Saturday, 84-74. The Havoc getting to rush the court once again for the second straight time when facing a ranked opponent.
Yeah, and you know what? When that game got started, there was so much juice in the building. They were so hyped. The team was so into it. A lot of energy. I thought, wow, okay, if Utah State can withstand this, just play their game, not be overwhelmed with this, I don't know that these guys can sustain it. And to some degree, that was kind of true. I mean, Utah State was able to get it to basically, a 1-point game at about the 8-minute mark of the first half. But Grand Canyon made plays. And yes, there were bad calls and bad non-calls by the refs. One of the worst officiated games I've seen in a very long time. But that is not why Utah State lost the game. Utah State lost the game because they were outplayed in the interior. They struggled to change their game plan. They struggled to use Grand Canyon's physicality and aggressiveness against them. And the Aggies just kind of struggled to make some shots down stretches and couldn't make stops of their own. And allowed a bench guy who rarely plays to be the hero and had this monster game. Their 7'2" guy off the bench just looked like he was a Power 4 veteran starting center. And Aggies just could not find a way to eliminate him from the game.
Yeah, the Aggies shooting 5 of 20 on layups. They did go 5 of 6 on dunks. The one dunk was Zach Keller rejecting himself on the rim. So they got some open dunks, but when they were shooting relatively contested shots near the rim, I mean, half the time they were getting blocked. 6 blocks, all by the same guy you mentioned, Dennis Evans, who they kind of got into foul trouble at times, but, he was still plus 14 in his only 19 minutes on the court, having a big impact on defense. And then the Aggies couldn't get things going on the outside. So, you shoot 25% on layups, and then you shoot 25% on three-pointers. That's not going to get it done. And that's a big reason why the Aggies lost. I think they did an okay job at taking advantage of Grand Canyon's physicality on defense, because Grand Canyon were called for a bunch of fouls too. Like, when we talk about this being one of the worst officiated games, it was for both teams. You'd get the worst ticky-tack fouls called on both of these teams. And neither of these teams could get anything going on defense. They'd be trying to play defense, and then suddenly the referees would be like, well, you breathed on that guy, so therefore it's a foul.
Unless it was the first 10 minutes of the second half for Grand Canyon, in which no calls were fouled against them.
Yeah, and I think some of that was, you could see they were playing a little softer, and that's actually where the Aggies started shooting well inside, is Grand Canyon played softer. Might have got away with a few fouls, but I didn't really, when they were looking at how they had 0 fouls, usually I try and look back and think, okay, were there any times where they should have been called for a foul and they weren't? And I don't know, I think Grand Canyon just played a little softer on defense, probably on purpose, to avoid committing more fouls. And then they committed a bunch of fouls toward the end as they ramped things up physically. So, yeah, Utah State did an okay job there and shot okay on free throws. You go 17 of 23. That's all right. It could have been better. Could have been a lot worse. We've seen a lot worse from the Aggies in free throw shooting. But really, it comes down to Utah State playing its worst, really second worst game offensively. They had a worse night when they went to South Florida. And then they played their worst defensive game. Grand Canyon came in as a team ranking 180th in offensive efficiency. This is not a great offense. They're playing a good Aggie defense, a team that ranked top 40 in Ken Palm's defensive efficiency. And Grand Canyon just said, we're just going to power to the rim and dare you to stop us. And the referees would call foul on a bunch of those, runs to the rim. Of course, a lot of times Grand Canyon would just make the shot anyway. They have powerful, long bigs who are able to shoot over the Aggies' rim protection because they don't have length at those rim protecting spots. So if you got the athletes that can shoot over that, you can get and ones. The Aggies were also in scramble situations on defense, and that leads to fouls. So, most of those 27 fouls were actually fouls. The Aggies were sloppy on defense. Referees just added a few extra on a handful of possessions. So the Aggies couldn't stop fouling. They couldn't protect the rim effectively. And then that impacted their ability to defend the perimeter. And that's where Grand Canyon had guys like Brian Moore and Mekhi Williams going off, because they ended up scoring the bulk of the points. Mm-hmm. Nana Owusu Anane, getting his name backward. He was really softening him up. Jaden Henley, those guys are scoring 11, 10 points. Guys like Dennis Evans and F.A. Demeril, who were causing the Aggies problems in the paint defensively and rebounding, they're 6'10", 7-foot bigs combined for 11 points. So sure, they were maybe causing some issues in rebounding and softening up the bigs inside, but then it was, again, Brian Moore and Mekhi Williams who were hitting shots on the outside. And then themselves, they would get to the paint and draw fouls when they got there because the Aggies were caught in scramble situations. So the Aggies played one of their worst games offensively and then just straight up their worst game defensively. This is the most points they've given up. I didn't check if it was one of the highest 3-point or field goal percentages they've given up, but they just played their worst game on defense. And I think Grand Canyon had a lot to do with that. They had a good game plan, and they had the players to, pull off that game plan. Force the Aggies to defend physically when they have a size disadvantage. Grand Canyon knew they had that advantage, and they pressed it as hard as they could. The referees kind of helped in that case, but the Aggies didn't help themselves, and they could have. They had a possession in the second half where they forced 3 or 4 straight stops, but they also allowed 3 offensive rebounds.
Yeah.
You got the stops, you couldn't get the rebound. And that came at a crucial time when the Aggies were trying to get back into the game. They pulled within 1 or 2 possessions. It was kind of on this rolling sequence where the Aggies would get within 2 or 3, then they go back down 7, then they get within 2 or 3, they'd go back down 6. Every time they got close, they'd blow it, miss a shot, have a bad defensive possession, commit a dumb foul. And in the end, it just comes down to the fact the Aggies had one of their worst games on offense and the worst game on defense. Take that for what it's worth. You just hope it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, like most good teams still have bad games. Great teams rarely have bad games. But if you're going to be a good team, like this is something that they can't allow to be repeated. This is, to some ways, there's kind of similar to the South Florida game. There was a lot of hype and excitement of how dominant Utah State was leading up to it. Maybe reading their press clippings a little too much, not quite as prepared as they needed to, on the road in a different environment, and they just couldn't quite ever get their footing. This was a similar situation leading up to this matchup with Grand Canyon. Never ever really able to gain their footing. And when it looked like times that they were starting to, they just weren't able to sustain it. And I have to give Grand Canyon credit for their home crowd and how excited those players were. They were playing like it was their Super Bowl, like it was their national championship game. Credit to them for doing that. Utah State has to find ways to match that. And Mason Falslev, he came to play. Adeline Elamine, he came to play. I thought there were certainly stretches where Carson Templin was very active, and he came to play. Yeah. Not to say that other guys didn't come to play. It just those guys in particular had the energy necessary to play in that environment. A few of the other guys just didn't have that. They looked a little shell-shocked and just couldn't ever get it going for themselves.
Yeah, Gary Clark just struggled in the few minutes that he played. Only ended up playing 5 minutes. Colby King didn't have nearly the impact that he typically does. Elijah Perryman struggled. And ended up playing only 8 minutes. Just couldn't find a way to get him on the court. Tucker Anderson had to come in because they were looking for somebody to get a spark.
Yeah.
And he ended up doing decent for his 12 minutes that he played, but didn't make a massive positive impact. But yeah, it came down to Mason putting forth as much effort as he could. And as you said, I think Adeline Elamine, another fitting player who is really coming to his own these last few games. Put up another double-digit game, 12 points, had 7 rebounds. He's someone who's really coming to his own as a freshman and becoming not just a guy who's filling a spot in the lineup card. He's starting to make an impact from that spot in the starting lineup, and I think will play a key role for the Aggies going forward. One thing that I actually want to bring up here, and it's kind of an observation that I made, like it was after Thursday or Friday, where I was talking about how this year's team can be different from last year's team and can be even better. They have the capability. I put in doubt that they would be able to go like 18-2 or 19-1 in conference play. So they had the capability because of the defense. There's also depth. And after saying those things, I noticed a few trends. And then after the Grand Canyon loss, I was like, wait a minute. This is starting to feel a lot like last year. And so I want to bring this up, standing by the fact that I still believe this team is capable. Like, sure, they have a stinker. I kept saying they're going to have one of those games. And they might lose to somebody who they shouldn't lose to. Kept saying it was going to happen.
Once you become a ranked team, you're going to get everybody's best shot. Everybody in the crowd, the student section, everybody's going to be super hyped about trying to take down the ranked team in their conference.
Yeah, and even if they weren't, like, there's just going to be a game where the Aggies are just not going to be at their best. And that's what happened. They weren't at their best. They played one of their worst offensive games, and then they played their worst defensive game. And again, I went back and looked at last year, and I kind of wrote a bit of this into my recap of the game. Said, this time last year, January 15th, 16th of 2025, the Aggies were ranked 22nd in the country. They were ranked in the 92nd percentile in defense. We talk about how bad the defense was last year, ranking 150th. Well, about this time last year, we were talking about how elite the defense was, and the matchup zone was a problem for everybody. And so they had an elite defense. They had an elite offense by the metrics. And then, what happened the rest of the way? The defense started to fall apart. They lost to UNLV. Pretty much the minute they got ranked, they lost. Then they got blown out at home against New Mexico. They got blown out again when they went to the pit. They got blown out in back-to-back games against Boise and Colorado. they had some good games in between that. They beat Colorado State at home. They beat San Diego State at home. They had a crazy blowout, 105-57 over San Jose. It's not like Utah State had a Boise State-esque collapse late in the season, losing games that they shouldn't have lost and all those kind of things. But they went from being a team that we were talking about, hey, can this team get a 5 or a 6 seed? We were having those same conversations a year ago.
And about this very same time.
Yeah, about this very same time before they lost that game on January 15th a year ago to UNLV on the road. And Utah State, again, didn't go to a collapse where they missed the tournament. They went from a team at the top, first place, far and away. Everyone knew the Aggies were the best team in the conference. They won at San Diego State, at Nevada. Wins against Boise State, San Jose, and Fresno. So they started 5-0 in conference play. And so they were far and away the favorites, first place in the conference and all that. And then they go from clear top of the conference team to outside of the contention bubble. Now, they still finished near the top of the conference. They still went to the NCAA tournament. Were still relatively competitive in the conference tournament, although they did run into Colorado State. Excuse me. Well, then they end with a 72-47 loss to UCLA in the NCAA tournament. But still, there are a lot of uncomfortable similarities between this year's Aggie team up to this point and last year's team. Now, I don't know if history is necessarily going to repeat itself. But this is the point where the Aggies need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, I believe that this team has the capability. I'm not going to back down from that assessment I had last week and suddenly change my mind. But I, at the same time, recognize I've suddenly read this story before. I had that realization. I've read this story before. And I don't want to walk into that trap, without acknowledging, hey, look, this is something that happened before. And student of history is something I try to be. If something's happened before, I look for the parallels of it to maybe happen again.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation. I think it's becoming a little more illustrative, but I think what we've been trying to tell ourselves is, well, this year is different because, and we've been trying to illustrate reasons why. There's more depth. They're longer. They've got more experience. They've got younger guys. They've got more fuel in the tank. The stars aren't playing as many minutes. So they're not, the wear and tear isn't the same on their bodies. So we've been saying these things, maybe trying to make ourselves believe that it will be a different script. And I think those are still very interesting and very valid reasons why this year could be different. But it's still, as you said, it's still early to be putting too much ahead of this Utah State men's basketball team, because the script is eerily similar so far. Yeah,
and so there are things that need to change. You need to have the bigs playing better. What happened against Grand Canyon is the stuff we started seeing all over the place when they got deep into conference play. When they were playing teams like Boise and Colorado, where their bigs were just getting beat up. They were struggling against Wyoming. New Mexico just, was able to completely control the interior against the Aggies. So Carson Templin, he's a year older. He's better. Zach Kell, I know he doesn't play a ton, but he needs to play his role as well when he's on the court. Gary Clark needs to not be in foul trouble, needs to be effective. He needs to be able to defend the paint and, rebound and do all these things at the Mountain West level. He was able to do those things down in the SWAC, or I forget where Texas A&M Corpus Christi plays, but he was able to do that at those lower conferences. He needs to be able to come in and do that.
And we've seen him do it in the non-conference, but yeah. You're right. This is Mountain West play. It's a different level. He has to be able to learn and adapt and adjust so he can be on the court. Aggies need him on the court.
Yeah, they need him on the court, and they need their bigs to be great. Adlon Elamine, I think he is an improvement in some ways to what Tucker Anderson was last year. So there's an improvement there. And again, I stand by, looking at Drake Allen, Colby King, and Mason Falstaff and MJ Collins. They are a better defense on the perimeter than they had last year. So they need to keep that going. They need to not let up in conference play when they're facing. They faced elite guards in the non-conference, so it's not like they should be struggling when they get into Mountain West play, because every night we were talking about this guard, who's a 6'1" and he averages 18 points a game. And the next night you're facing a 6'5" guy who averages 16 points a game. And the next night it's a 19-point, 5'9" point guard. Like, the Aggies faced a bunch of these guys. It's not like the Mountain West guards are like this super special group of players. They are good, but it's nothing the Aggies haven't seen. So it just comes down to reset. You know who you are. You know this defense has been good all year. Make sure that you're as well rested as possible, but also being able to put in what work you can. Balancing the practice and rest. Make sure you understand the scout. That was something that Jared Calhoun talked about earlier today. We'll play the press conference tomorrow, but he talked about not understanding the scouting report well enough. There just seemed to be some breakdowns in terms of scouting, and so just don't do that again. Make sure you understand who you're guarding. Make sure you know what their strengths are. Make sure you know where that player's spots are so you don't let him get to those spots. And overall, there's no reason to panic, but there is reason to point out that there are things that the Aggies need to do to avoid going down the wrong path again. And this team has the tools to go down the right path, to be the Mountain West champions. They have those. We've not been blowing smoke this entire season, propping up a team that doesn't have talent, that doesn't have ability, and that doesn't have the coaching or all that stuff. They have all those things. They didn't get to 15-2 on accident. But you got to recognize there are weaknesses, and if you don't address those and get better at those, last year the Aggies were exploited because they didn't cover up their weaknesses. This year, we've thought the weaknesses were smaller, but maybe this game says, hey, maybe you're a little more prone to being dominated by physical teams. Is that going to happen again like it did last year? They need to shore that up, or we see what happened last year. Yeah. And so this is where we end up on a crossroad with this team. They're either going to go on and be the team of destiny we thought we were kind of all propping them up to be, or they're going to be just like last year's team, which there are a lot worse fates than, being an NCAA tournament team. But it's not the lofty standard that Aggie fans want.
Right, because Nevada may have provided a bit of a blueprint, which Grand Canyon then followed and was able to better execute because of their size. Because that Nevada game was really anybody's game until 5-6 minutes to go in the second half, and that's if that game's in Nevada, is it a different outcome? I don't know, but Utah State didn't win that game until pulling away late. Grand Canyon uses a bit of that blueprint, being physical against Utah State, especially in the paint, and Aggies really struggled against that. But we had a couple of texts that came through over the weekend on the Young Power Sports of Logan text line, and some this morning. So we'll get to those here on our special podcast of the Full Court Press. Some of these may have been meant for KVNU Aggie Call. Sometimes that happens. They bleed through on our text line. Maybe they're just still intending it for us. But we'll address them all the same. 9310 sent this in on Saturday afternoon. Imagine if this team had a Trevin Dorius or a Dan Akin. Our team as a whole, and we couldn't cover it up today.
Yeah, and Utah State tried to go after bigs with a little more size and length. And I think Zach Keller was kind of supposed to be that player who, has a bit more size and length. Whereas there are also a lot of teams that like to have a 6'8", or, look at Dan Akin, he's 6'9". They play him at center. And, they like the versatility that gives them, especially with
Carson Templin and Dan Akin are like similar archetypes.
Yeah, I think Carson Templin kind of fills that Dan Akin, but neither of them had the Trevin Dorius size. And you look at, how the Aggies struggled when they would face centers with a lot of size. There were times this year where it was a bit of a struggle. It was, I think there was one team who was at Charlotte. They struggled for like a little bit because they had like a 7'4" guy or something like that, or 7'2", a really tall guy. But they ended up getting around him. They managed to make things work even with him on the court. But then like against Grand Canyon, although Uso Anani ended up probably having the biggest impact of any of the bigs, where he goes for 11 and 11 and was a team best plus 20. Still, Dennis Evans and Dusty Stromer and F.A. Demerol, they still cause the Aggies problems. Maybe not statistically, but if they're there, then suddenly the Aggies are putting a bunch of effort into preventing them from getting rebounds, and then suddenly Brian Moore is swooping in for 3 offensive rebounds. And that's kind of a knock-on effect that the bigs can have. So lacking someone of that top-end size, I think, hurts. I believe Carter Welling was a player, I remember, who was really close to coming to Utah State, ends up going to Clemson. And he's actually playing pretty well at Clemson. He's averaging 10 points and 6 rebounds and just under a block per game. So he maybe could have brought that production to Utah State. But ultimately, the Aggies had to go with who they could get to come here and who they could afford. And they had to spend a lot of resources on their backcourt. Keeping Mason Falslip here, that was a big part of their budget. And so to have guys like Mason Falslip here, to keep someone like Carson Templin, they had to pay money to get them. And they didn't have a ton left over to bring in bigs. They barely had any to give out to any like high-level bigs. And they're going to have to do that again because they're going to have to shell out to keep Adlan Elamine and Elijah Perryman and, again, Mason Falslip, who's going to be getting even bigger offers from outside sources this offseason. So I don't know if the Aggies are going to easily overcome that in terms of how, are they going to have a 7-footer on the team? I don't know. And I think part of it is that Jared Calhoun, and Eric Hout, they have a certain kind of defense which doesn't fit 7-footers really well. Look at Isaac Johnson. He could hardly do anything here. He goes to Hawaii and he's balling out. I think that so it's kind of a combination of Utah State is struggling to get players who can be highly effective 7-foot centers. It's hard to get those to come to Utah State. And you can't just throw any 7-footer in the system because a lot of those 7-footers will just struggle.
Right. It's got to be the right guy. It's got to be the right fit for him and for the team to make sense. Another text that came through, 8577. Why has MJ Collins... Oh, sorry, got a couple texts here. I know Gary Clark picked up 2 quick fouls, but why didn't Calhoun play him more in the second half? And also, why has MJ Collins struggled the past 2 games? How can we get him more involved and get the ball in his hands?
I mean, he attempted 13 shots, which is the second most on the team. He attempted 6 3-pointers, went to the foul line a couple of times. He was involved in the offense.
Yeah, he was involved.
He just didn't hit his shots.
It's not like they were shadowing him or hiding him. He had opportunities. He was involved in the offense. He just wasn't making his shots.
Yeah, so, he's potentially struggling. Of course, MJ Collins, I'm almost talk about how many similarities there are between this year and last year. Look at the way Ian Martinez started the year and the way he finished it. He was never bad, but he went from putting up 18, 19 a game and shooting 50, 50, 90 to, putting up 14, 15 a night on 44, 38, and, probably still 90. He was a good free throw shooter the whole year, but
yeah.
But MJ is starting to cool off a little bit, and this is where you find out how good a player truly is, because MJ Collins started off this year absolutely red hot on fire. Now, over the last 2 games, he's cooled off. He again went from shooting 50% overall and 50% from 3, and the last 2 games he's 36% overall, 21% from 3. That's something that's going to happen to a player,
especially later in the season you go, because there's more film on them and teams start to figure out how to defend because they want to take that offensive firepower away defensively.
Yeah.
And so, how does MJ Collins adjust to the increased pressure and increased attention on defense?
Yeah. And so he's going to have to do with that. And the fact, how do you just bounce back from that cold spell anyway? Because you're just going to have a cold spell as a player. You're human. You're going to have that inconsistency. And it's not like 5 of 13 is the most devastating, shooting percentage in the world. And 3 of 9 isn't the most absolutely devastating percentage in the world. And to be honest, he made up for it kind of at least in the Nevada game, by going to the free throw line a bit more. So it's about bouncing back. But of course, as MJ Collins has struggled a little bit, well, then you get back-to-back 25-point games
Yeah,
from
look
Mason
what Mason's
Falstaff.
done in 2 games.
So as teams focused on MJ, suddenly they realize, oh, wait, there's this Mason guy who's going to go off for 25 if we put all the emphasis on MJ. And so that's where when you have a 1-2 punch, you can survive that. Teams thought Mason wasn't going to push it that much, and then suddenly he did. And yeah, and so you could end up seeing this bit of a seesaw where MJ Collins and Mason Falstaff begin kind of trading back and forth who's going to have a 22-point game. And that's fine. Like, as long as you get like 35-ish points, like if you get 35 points out of MJ and Mason, you're fine. Because that's 20 points, 15 from the other. If you get 30 points from both of them, you're probably still fine because that's 15 apiece, or like 20 from one, 10 from the other. Anywhere between 30 and 35 points. I mean, obviously, if you get more, that's even better. But like, if you can get 30 to 35 points out of Mason and MJ combined, you're fine.
You're generally going to be in a good spot. Yeah.
And if that means one of them has 26 and the other has 7, you're still mostly fine. It's just one had an off night and one had a great night. If they both have 17, you're fine. So that's where I think, sure, it's a little frustrating to see MJ Collins suffer, but like, as long as you have one of these two guys going, you're going to have enough on offense. The main problem, to be honest, is that everyone aside from Mason and MJ was just mostly absent on offense, especially shooting percentage wise. Heck, even Mason started struggling shooting percentage wise toward the end of the game. So that ended up being a kind of a bigger thing than MJ having a subpar night. It was everyone having a terrible night shooting.
Yeah, and I don't know about Gary Clark, why he didn't see more time later. It may have been just they could see that he didn't have it that night. I don't know why you don't give him another chance. But they gave Tucker more of a run to get out there and try to do some things. But Gary Clark, he struggled. And he picked up 2 quick fouls and only lasted 5 minutes on the court. I was a little surprised he didn't have a chance in the second half to try to come out and redeem himself. But he hasn't been as effective in these last couple of games, to be honest. Yeah,
he's gotten into foul trouble, and then he just ends up kind of out of the rotation, and the coaches, either forget to put him back in or just aren't confident enough to put him back in. Although, weirdly enough, Gary Clark had the best plus-minus on the team. It's only 5 minutes, so it's not really indicative of anything, but still, it's like, it would have been nice to give him another chance, especially where you had Adlin Elmy and Carson Templin both getting in foul trouble. You needed another big on the court, and they kind of refused to use one of the 3 bigs they have.
Yeah.
Instead, going with Tucker Anderson. Tucker Anderson probably played the minutes that Gary Clark maybe should have done, but Coach Calhoun was looking for anything he could potentially get.
Yeah, he had some size and might as well try to use it. 8968 text in earlier. It says, I truly believe Mason deserves Player of the Week in the Mountain West, but I also would gladly trade it for a decent referees and a victory over the Jackalopes. And these guys have to come to Cache Valley the end of next month. I hope we are up to nice warm welcome. Maybe they can have a camp out.
Yeah, we'll see if they camp out in freezing weather instead of the absolutely frigid, I think 77 degrees it was in Phoenix around the time they were
it's rough
camping.
Yeah, it's really hard. Lows
of an absolutely bone-chilling 50 degrees at night.
I mean, that's commitment, sacrifice right there.
It's like I gotta applaud them for that.
Yes, you have to remember they will have a return trip, and I'm sure it'll be a very warm welcome for Utah State when they do. As far as Mason getting Player of the Week, I mean, individually, his performance probably is deserving, but when you split games, you're probably not going to get it.
Okay, but that's the thing. This is what I brought up last week when Elijah Price won it, and they went 1-1. Like, I don't know. It's just a weird thing. And then you have San Diego State. They go 2-0, and you have, Miles Byrd playing really well in a game against New Mexico, and it just. Draw Gibbs Longhorn ended up winning that award because he had 33 points against Boise. That's it. Like, he had 10 points in the next game. Like, he wasn't even the leading scorer. Like, he was like...
Yeah, across 2 games played, Mason probably had the best outcome.
I'm not sure... Gibbs Lawhorn was the second leading scorer in the conference over those 2 games. He might have been, with 43 points over 2 games. But the Mountain West went against their criteria to give Player of the Week to a guy who averaged double-double over 2 games. Then when a guy puts up 25 points in back-to-back games and gets a double-double in one of those, he had 12 rebounds against Grand Canyon. He went for 25 and 12, which I'd argue was a more impressive stat line than what Gibbs Lawhorn did, where he scored his 33 in overtime. And, I don't really care who wins these Player of the Week awards. To me, I just want to point out the inconsistency in the criteria. Because, again, Gibbs Lawhorn is a defensible pick. Dude had a fantastic game, and sometimes that one game is just going to get you to Player of the Week. And, Elijah Price was a legit candidate for Player of the Week. It's not like they're picking random bums off the street who don't deserve any consideration for the award. Yeah. The guys they picked did deserve consideration for the award. I'm just okay, but you have criteria that you have spelled out. And you reject that criteria one week, and then you're well, wait a minute, it has to go to a guy that went 2-0 this week. And it's come on, guys, just be consistent.
Yeah, I know. Tough loss there for Utah State. They when you look at the standings, there was another big showdown Saturday night between San Diego State and New Mexico. Aztecs took care of business, so they stand alone as the undefeated team in conference play. They're number 1. Utah State is number 2. Now New Mexico has 2 losses in conference play, so they're number 3. Utah State falls out of the top position in the Mountain West, but they also fall out of the top 25, which isn't too surprising. And when you're right there near the bottom and you lose a game on the road at a barely top 100 team in the net. So New Mexico has 2 losses, Nevada and Grand Canyon and UNLV. All of them have 2 losses. So it's a pretty tight race in the Mountain West Conference right now. And Utah State will face UNLV tomorrow night in the Spectrum in a late one. But when you look, and then you look at the net rankings as well, Utah State didn't fall really that hard with the loss. They went from 15 to 21. So they really didn't fall that far. Grand Canyon saw a big boost with their win, as you would suspect. San Diego State continues to climb. And when you look at the latest bracket matrix, Utah State's in as a 7, and New Mexico is at an 11. San Diego State is on the outside, but they are starting to appear in some brackets.
Which is weird. I would have had San Diego State in, I think, before New Mexico with the way the Aztecs had started off. I imagine a lot of those on bracket matrix haven't been updated from over the weekend. I mean, some of them I think will be. I haven't checked it myself today.
Yeah, you're right. This was last updated January 16th. So This does not reflect what happened in San Diego.
Yeah, so you'll probably see Utah State fall to probably still within a 7 seed. Because you're this far into the season, one loss isn't going to drop you that much. Even if you're Utah State and you're in the top 15, where winning by only 2 can drop you 2 spots, because you're just playing, you're at such a high level and all the teams around you have such high expectations. If you don't constantly live up to them, you can drop. But still, losing a game, losing it on the road to a decent team in Grand Canyon, and you're going to fall, but it's not going to be a catastrophic fall. So it'll, the Aggies can rebound, and it's earlier. I'm trying not to act like the sky is falling. So despite all my talk about how maybe this year will be the same as last year, there's still room for them to bounce back. There's still plenty of time. They just got to, put their nose back to the grindstone, reset things, put this game behind them emotionally and physically, and just prepare for these games in the same way that you've seen them prepare for games like Colorado State and Boise State. And just understand that grind, and then also learn from, okay, this is the toughest environment that they've had to play in all year.
Yes, absolutely.
They're going to go face tougher environments.
They will face San Diego State. They will face New Mexico. Yeah. So they've they've got to figure out how to perform and stay with it in spite of these hostile environments.
Yeah. So, guys like, Drake Allen and Mason Falslev and Carson Temple, and they've all played in these places before. And like, honestly, you can see where some of those guys were the ones who stepped up their game a little bit more. But, Elijah Perryman, Gary Clark, some of these guys that maybe haven't done that as much, okay, they've gotten their first taste of like, this is what, really good atmospheres are like. This is what it's like when you actually play in front of a crowd that brings a ton of energy against you. They've played against relatively empty stadiums, crowds that don't give a whole lot of energy, but they've not been in a hostile crowd like that, and it's only going to get tougher. Because again, Grand Canyon's a good environment, but it ain't the Pit.
No.
It ain't Viejas.
Utah State cleaned up against the lower part of the conference so far.
Yeah.
Now they're going to start to shift and face the higher end of the conference. So it's going to be a lot more of a challenge for them for these next couple of weeks. Now, UNLV is still near the bottom. They've got Colorado State a little bit later on. This is a team that's right in the middle, but and who's had some injuries, but guys are starting to come back. So this is going to be these right. You can't lose ground. If Utah State wants to be sure that they're in and have a decent seed, then these are important games. And after a frustrating loss, it's good to have another game kind of close on the schedule so you don't have to sit and stew on it for too long.
Yeah, it'll be a similar team. Like Utah State, they're going to face similar challenges. Not across the board. UNLV is going to be a little different, but there's going to be some similarities in the way that they're going to look at the way Grand Canyon attacked the paint and with physicality.
Two of the best, the top three players for UNLV are guys that are 6'8" and 6'9".
Yeah, and they've got players who they're one of the better teams at drawing fouls. Their free throw to field goal attempt ratio is one of the best in the country. They're top 7 at drawing fouls. They play physical. They muck things up. They also foul a lot on their end, so that's something the Aggies can maybe take advantage of. But we might see another ugly game. We might see another foul-happy game. And so the Aggies might be back in the mud with another team. And like we've seen in most games where they were in the muck and the mud and things were dirty and ugly, the Aggies still won most of the time. And so it's not like the Aggies can't win there. It's just, well, on this occasion against Grand Canyon, they lost. They got punched in the mouth, and they weren't quite ready for it on that occasion. UNLV is going to try and do the same thing. Make sure you respond, much like they did against Nevada, where Nevada kind of punched them in the nose a little bit. San Jose did a little bit. The Aggies have responded before. They just need to make sure they learn from the one time that they didn't respond.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Some news with Utah State football. Before we do that, though, I just want to mention our friends at Mountain Valley Heating and Air. It's where you can feel the love with their comfort. They provide comfort to those who deserve it. 753-5170 is a phone call that you can make to get their help, where they can provide different services, HVAC services, installations, repairs, and comfort, heating, cooling, maintenance. It's all available from Mountain Valley Heating and Air, 753-5170. Transfer portal closed officially on Friday. And so no more players, at least that we know of, from Utah State that are in the portal. But there are now the focus has been more shifting towards those coming in, filling spots, filling holes. And looks like this Utah State football team is getting some upgrades at positions. A good number of those players who put their names in the portal have transferred down when you look at the vast majority of them. But when you look at the players coming to Utah State, there's a good number of these players who have P5 experience and some even starting experience in G5. This is a football roster that's coming together for Utah State football.
Yeah, so there were a few who I think added their name to the portal. Zion Andreasen, Caleb Mitchell are reportedly both those players going to the portal. Andreasen didn't ever publicly announce it. It's just suddenly Weber State was announcing they'd signed him. So I don't know when he entered his name into the portal, but at some point between January 2nd and January 15th, he put his name in, and he signed with Weber State on the 15th. So I imagine it was probably around he might have entered it in immediately, to be honest. Where he wasn't getting a whole lot of playing time, so he jumps in there. But yeah, the Aggies added, I think, I didn't update my transfer tracker for a week. There were about 4 players, I believe, in that time, at least that I've been able to confirm, have joined the Aggies. I feel like we had talked about Jeremiah Holmes, or maybe he was a name that I'd noticed. But the Aggies are stacking up edge rushers. They added Adonis Jackson from Mississippi Valley State earlier. They added Jordan Pendleton. And now they've added Jeremiah Holmes. So they lose Will Holmes and they add Jeremiah Holmes. Maybe that's why his name was familiar. They're all FCS players. So, take that for what it's worth. But they were guys who are productive edge rushers, all around 30 to 40 tackles. And
good physical size.
Yeah, good size. They're all around 6'3", 6'4", and anywhere between 235 and 250 pounds. So they're adding size and a lot of players to that edge rusher position. So sure, they ended up losing a lot with Will Holmes, but they have some guys returning, and they're adding in like 3-4 guys from the transfer portal, guys who played 400 or 500 snaps at the FCS level. So dang near Division I. Just under FBS, where previously the Aggies had really gone after the JUCO ranks for edge rushers. And that had, the one guy who worked out was Kean Sloan, and even then it was it took him 2 years to finally be a decent, productive guy. And so they're now going after FCS guys. So that's where they've added, so that's one of the guys they added, Jeremiah Holmes. They also added Harrison Taggart, who played at Cal last season, also played at BYU and Oregon. I believe he was a starter at BYU a couple years ago, where last year he was at Cal, but then he transferred from BYU, where he played 12 games as a sophomore, had 69 tackles, 2.5 sacks, or 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack. He also had an interception. Involved in a couple of forced fumble and a fumble recovery. But then he transferred to Cal. Ended up seeing his snap count go down a little bit, and he only has 38 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. But this is a guy who's been playing at the Power Conference level. He's got 3 seasons of experience appearing in at least 12 games at a Power Conference level. 2 years with BYU in the Big 12. He was with the Oregon in the Pac-12, but it was a redshirt season. He appeared in 3 games, mostly on special teams. But 2 years at BYU, 1 as a starter for the most part. And then Cal, I don't know if he was a starter, but he was playing a lot of snaps. Played about 300 snaps for Cal as one of their linebackers. So this is a guy who's not just been at Power Conference programs. He's been playing, and playing pretty consistently, even if not necessarily a star, but he's been playing a lot. And so I think that's the big add for the Aggies. Yeah,
I love to see the emphasis on upgrades on defense, what Utah State's doing. That was a concern for USU this last season. Got better as the season went on, especially the last couple of games, bowl game notwithstanding. But Utah State looked like, as a team, was understanding a little bit more of what they needed to do, but still, getting more time with the defensive staff and with these players and getting some upgrades at key positions. That's going to help Utah State be more competitive as they move into the Pac-12.
Yeah. Next, they added a running back. They've not added a ton on offense, but they have added some now, especially with the running back Sesi, I think it's S-E-S-I. I think that's Sesi, and then Vailahi. 5'9", 206 pounds. That's a lot of weight for a 5'9" running back. Could see a guy who maybe
bowling ball.
Yeah, maybe plays a bit bigger than his height listing. Was like their third running back. Had 42 carries for 152 yards, a couple of touchdowns. Caught a few passes as well. 8 receptions for 54 yards. This is at Oklahoma State last year. So
was it the 3rd or 4th player at Oklahoma State?
It's the 3rd, I think. Because I noticed that too, because they added David Kabongo, a safety, Matthew Wade, an offensive lineman, and now a running back from Oklahoma State. So adding a lot of, I don't know if it's the greatest sign because Oklahoma was like 1-11. So I don't know if it's a
lot of players are looking for different opportunities there.
Things just didn't go right, and they're trying to find new opportunities. Hopefully, we'll be able to find good times with the Aggies, but talented players. They just need to find the right system and I think the right opportunity. So yeah, the Aggies heading run. They lose Miles Davis, who's now going to the draft. Of course, he graduated, and he's going to the draft. So you got Javen Jacobs coming back. So you do also have Noah White, who is still going to be involved there, but still adding some competition. Have at least 3 running backs that you can feel confident in. And
With different styles too, which is I think complementary to provide different options when they're on the field.
Yeah, and he might help a little bit more in the power situation where he's got a bit more size than White or Javen Jacobs do. Then you have Chapman Lewis, who people were talking about how this guy is a starter on Texas Tech. Well, he started last year for Texas Tech. Of course, Texas Tech was a decent team last year too, I think. But he didn't play. He appeared in 4 games this year, or well, technically he appeared in 6, I think. But he preserved his red shirt despite that because he appeared in 4 games all on special teams. He basically just didn't play defense this year. Then he played a snap in a few of the games in bowl game, championship game, and all that. With Texas Tech participating in the college football playoff and a lot of the postseason, he appeared in some of those games, but basically didn't play at all this year for all intents and purposes. Had 6 snaps on defense and 20-something snaps on special teams. But in 2024, he was a starting safety for a decent chunk of the season and put up some good stats. And he's a 6'1", 185-pound safety. Got a couple years of eligibility left, and the Aggies, again, need to add bodies in the secondary, and they're doing just that, not only with Lewis, but they've added 1, 2, 3 other one other safety and 2 other cornerbacks. The Aggies are really addressing their defensive backfield in the transfer portal. They're finding guys that can be plug and play. Pretty much every single one of these guys are plug and play.
It seems like a big emphasis in the portal so far has been defense, but there have been some offensive guys. They've got 3 offensive linemen, wide receiver, quarterback, got a running back. So there are some key guys that they've been able to get. Still, I think they need a tight end or 2 that they still need out of the portal. Probably need another wide receiver as well. So there's still some needs that need to be addressed for this football team. They still have some time. Again, Friday was just the last day for players to put their names in. So there's still players to recruit and try to get here to Utah State. I know they're anxious to get them here to try to be part of the weight training and whatever they plan on doing in spring ball coming up in late March and April. Still don't know what that schedule is going to look like. But I do know they're still going to try to get as many guys on campus as they can this semester.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, they still have needs. You've outlined the ones I think they need the most. They need tight ends. They have some in the pipeline, but they're guys who have basically never played. So they need more depth at tight end. But, I mean, back when the offseason was just starting, I wrote an article. Here are the things the Aggies need. They need a quarterback. They need more offensive linemen. They need edge rushers. I stopped at 3, but I probably would have gone on to, I might have included the defensive backfield. But you look at what are the things the Aggies have done. They went out and got a quarterback out of the portal, a guy who can very likely come in and start, has already started for the Aggies before.
Yep.
They've gotten 3 offensive linemen out of the portal, 2 of them out of power conference teams, one of them, a guy who played very well for an FCS school. All three of the guys have good size and length for their spot on the offensive line. They went out and they got 3 edge rushers. They've gone out and gotten 4 defensive backs, all 4 of which could end up being starters next year. And then you've got, depth that you're developing, from, the back end of the roster last year who are going to step up and not be at the back end of the roster. They'll be at the very tail end of the depth chart, the guys who will get some snaps and hopefully eventually become starters. So the Aggies have had a very good start to the transfer portal season where they didn't really get killed in the players that they lost. Sure, some of those hurt. Braden Pagan hurts. Junior Sia, that's some depth that you've lost at the offensive line. Will Holmes, that's, a starter lost at outside linebacker. But again, they've not been killed in the transfer portal where they've had basically 4 of the 25 players they've lost are guys that are dang, that hurts. Whereas it used to be it was 10 or 15 guys they were losing. They'd lose every starter they had left was gone.
Right.
And so the Aggies haven't been hurt nearly as bad by the transfer portal. They did get hurt kind of badly by graduation, but they have done a great job at replacing the positions of highest need immediately by getting some of their best transfer additions in a while. These are pretty good transfer additions. And then they'll, work down again to things like tight end, get some more wide receivers. They did get a wide receiver because they've lost a lot of wide receiver production, so they got some wide receivers. They're adding depth to running back. And again, they'll work to tight end and some more wide receivers as well, but they've addressed most of their needs already.
Yeah. Normally, there used to be a second signing period, like in early February, and they would do a press conference.
I thought it was in like mid-January around now.
I don't know if they're going to do that again, because of the portal change. I know there was the early signing period in December.
It's February 4th.
So they will do another one. There's another.
Well, the Google, in the AI summary, is saying February 4th. And I think there's an ESPN article that's saying that. So
that's what is that, a Wednesday? First Wednesday of February?
Yes.
So that probably are the next chance we'll get to talk to Coach Mendenhall about his roster and what his spring schedule will look like.
Yeah, and by then they're probably going to have gone. They'll probably have gotten most of their transfer signings by then.
I would imagine.
It's entirely possible they'll end up adding somebody after that, but at that point you're going to have most of the transfer additions. They'll be finalizing all of the high school additions if there are any last-second commits or decommits or whatever. So they'll have all that finalized, and so we'll have a decent idea of what this roster looks like on February 4th. With some changes, there's inevitably changes, but you'll probably be looking at about a 90% of what 2026's roster will look like. We'll have that idea on February 4th.
I think that's going to do it for us. We'll have plenty more to talk about on Tuesday as Utah State prepares for UNLV. More reactions to what's going on throughout the Mountain West. Also, the NFL Final Four is now set. Conference championships are now set.
College football is finally going to end today.
That's true.
I've completely moved on from college football emotionally and mentally. And I was just sitting there last night with my brother being like, oh, yeah, college football championships tomorrow. I'm like, oh, yeah, we're sitting there watching the NFL. And it's like, oh, yeah, college football. Like, oh, that's a thing, I guess.
True. I also had forgotten that it's not done yet. And I think next year's calendar has it even later for the championship.
It's
ridiculous.
Just
silly.
I've completely moved on to the NFL. Of course, my Patriots are getting to the AFC title game, and everyone's crying delicious tears about how easy their path to the championship has been. Of course, they're probably just going to lose to the Broncos now. I am honestly 95% sure the Patriots are going to lose to the Broncos. Because, yeah, sure, everyone's already written the Broncos off because they have a backup quarterback. But what did the Patriots do in the Super Bowl against a freaking backup? Against Nick Foles.
You saw his tweet.
Oh, no, I had that thought. I didn't need to be reminded by Nick Foles that the Patriots lost to a backup in the Super Bowl. And they lost to Eli Manning twice, who's basically a backup.
That was a funny post. That was well done. Well done.
Yeah, I didn't need to be reminded by Nick Foles. I thought of that a full day before Nick Foles posted anything about it. I did not need to be reminded by him. I know the Patriots' history in every single Super Bowl. I can tell you how the game went. I can tell you what I remember about it. Can't go back to the earliest Super Bowls because I wasn't a Patriots fan back then. But yeah, I did not need to be reminded.
That's going to do it for us on this special podcast edition for the Full Court Press. Thanks for tuning in. Of course, if you heard anything that you want to react to, you can always send a message on the Young Power Sports of Logan text line, and we'll get around to it as soon as we can. 435-339-0321. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back at it again on Tuesday afternoon, 4 o'clock on 106.9 FM, 1390 AM, The Fan.